Today's lesson is about the equivalent fraction rule 5-11. So I want you to think about some facts that we already know. We know that 5 times 1 is 5, 32 times 1 is 32, and 2/3 times 1 is 2/3, because anytime that you multiply something by 1, it stays the same, it's itself. So 5, that's what we started with, and it's the answer. 32, we multiplied that by 1, and we got the same thing that we started with. 2/3, when multiplied by 1, it is also, the answer is the same thing that we started with. So our question in this chapter is, if we multiply by a fraction that's equal to 1, do we still get an answer that is the same thing as what we started with? So here we have 2/3 times 4/4. When we multiply straight across, we will get 8/12. Let's think about that in picture form so we can really visualize. So in the first rectangle, I'm going to shade 2/3, and in the second rectangle, I'm going to shade 8/12. And we're going to see if they are the same thing. So there I shaded 2/3, and here is what 8/12 look like. If you look closely, you can see that the same amount of the rectangle is shaded in both rectangles. So 2/3 and 8/12 are equivalent fractions. They are the same thing. You can tell by the amounts drawn in the pictures. So when we multiply the same number on the top and bottom, it's just like when we're multiplying by 1. I drew a giant 1 around 4/4 so that you can really see that we're still following the same rule as when we multiply something by 1. 2/3 times 4/4 is the same thing, or an equivalent fraction, 8/12. 2/3 and 8/12 are equivalent fractions. That's why this is the equivalent fraction rule, because when we multiply the fraction, the same number on the top and bottom, it's just like multiplying something by 1, and we will get an equivalent fraction. Let's look at one more example to see if this always happens or just sometimes. So here I have 3/4 times 5/5. We want to see if we will get an equivalent fraction for the product, the answer. So 3 times 4 is 15, and 4 times 5 is 20. So I get 15/20. Are 3/4 and 15/20 equivalent? Here is a visual so you can see what 3/4 and 15/20 look like. So there you can see the amount that is shaded on the 3/4 is the same amount that's shaded on the 15/20. So they are equivalent, they're the same thing. That's because when we multiply a fraction, the same number on the top and bottom, it's just like multiplying the fraction by 1. We're getting the same or an equivalent answer, product. Let's look at one more question. How do you know that 5/5 is equivalent to 1? We keep drawing that giant 1 around the numbers that are the same as the top and the bottom, but how do we really know? So let's take a look at this visual, and then I'll explain deeper as to why. So if you think of your fraction circle pieces, you will have lots of 1/5 pieces, and I believe they're light green color. So if we took a 1/5 piece, like you see here, that's equal to 1/5. Okay, but what if we took 5 1/5 pieces, which is what 5/5 really means? Then we would get this. 1/5 5 times. And when you put them all together, they make a complete circle, or a whole. And a whole, we know, is one whole. So why is 5/5 equal to 1? Because we know that 5 1/5 are a whole. They make one whole.